The radio intercepts tell the story better than any satellite image ever could. At 4 o'clock hours on Tuesday morning, the Russian command channel in the Ivanivka sector was calm, filled with the routine boredom of occupation. By 4:15, that same channel was a cacophony of screaming, panic, and sheer terror. What the Russian generals in Moscow believed was a tactical retreat by Ukrainian forces was, in reality, the most sophisticated trap set since the Second World War. For 3 weeks, Ukrainian commanders played a dangerous game of poker. They deliberately weakened their center line, pulling back their heavy mechanized brigades and leaving only light infantry skirmishers behind. To the Russian surveillance drones hovering above, it looked like the Ukrainian defense was crumbling from exhaustion, smelling blood and desperate for a victory to show Vladimir Putin before the winter freeze. The Russian general staff made the fatal mistake. They committed their reserves. They poured the elite 76 Guards or Assault Division and 2 armored regiments directly into the soft center. Thinking they were chasing a fleeing enemy, they drove 10 kilometers deep into the pocket, celebrating what they thought was a breakthrough. But they didn't break through. They walked into a grave. The moment the Russian rearguard crossed the fatal coordinate line, the trap snapped shut. From the tree lines on the north and south flanks, which Russian intelligence swore were empty, thousands of Ukrainian troops emerged. But it wasn't just troops. It was a wall of steel. American-made Bradley fighting vehicles and German Leopard tanks, which had been hiding under thermal camouflage nets for days, roared to life. Simultaneously, Ukrainian Special Forces SSO infiltrated the rear, blowing up the only bridge across the river that served as the Russian supply line. In an instant, 20,000 Russian soldiers went from being the attackers to being the encircled prey. The psychological shock was instantaneous. You have to understand the terror of a soldier who realizes that forward is death, but backward is impossible. The kill zone was established. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a shooting gallery. The Russian columns, packed tight on the narrow roads, couldn't maneuver. They became sitting ducks for FPV drones that swarmed the sky like angry hornets. The lead tanks were hit first, blocking the road. Then the rear tanks were hit, blocking the retreat. And then, the artillery started. This chapter of the war will be written in history books not as a battle, but as the moment Russian hubris finally met Ukrainian ingenuity. The trap didn't just catch soldiers, it caught the entire reputation of the Russian military. And as the sun rose over Ivanivka, the realization set in. There was no way out. While the first chapter was about the psychology of the trap, this chapter is about the brutal business of industrial destruction. In modern warfare, you don't need to physically stand on a road to block it, you just need fire control. This is what separates the Ivanivka operation from the meat grinder battles of Bakhmut. Ukraine didn't sacrifice waves of infantry to close the pocket. They used superior mathematics and superior technology. Once the Russians were inside the kill zone, Ukraine unleashed a coordinated strike using Western-supplied HIMARS and 155mm cluster munitions. The precision was terrifying. We are talking about artillery systems linked directly to Starlink terminals, receiving real-time coordinates from drones hovering directly over the confused Russian columns. The result was the total disintegration of Russian heavy armor assets. In the first 48 hours of this encirclement, visual confirmation suggests Russia lost over $200 million worth of equipment. We are looking at the destruction of at least 30 T-90M Proriev tanks. Let's pause and look at the business file on that. The T-90M is Russia's most modern, battle-ready tank, costing roughly $4.5 million per unit. It takes months to build and requires sanctioned Western optics to function. Losing 30 of them in a single weekend isn't just a battlefield loss. It is a budgetary catastrophe that the Russian economy cannot absorb. But the cost goes deeper. Inside that cauldron are dozens of Zhuparkwan counter-battery radars and Borisogolsk to electronic warfare systems. These are high-value assets worth tens of millions of dollars each, designed to jam enemy communications. Ironically, they were destroyed because they couldn't jam the cheap, $500 drones dropping grenades on their antennas. The video footage coming out of the zone shows a highway of death scenario. The roads are littered with burning metal. Russian logistics trucks carrying fuel and ammunition were targeted first, creating massive secondary explosions that wiped out the infantry sheltering nearby. This is the definition of asymmetric exchange. Ukraine is using $2,000 artillery shells to destroy $5 million tanks. From an economic standpoint, this operation is bankrupting the Russian military district. They are throwing their most expensive assets into a furnace, and Ukraine is simply keeping the door locked. The Russian command is now trying to send in older T-62 and T-55 tanks to break the encirclement, but these antiques built in the 1950s lack the armor to survive even a glancing hit. It is a desperate flailing of a dying giant, throwing good money after bad, trying to buy time with metal that burns all too easily. If the equipment loss is a tragedy for the Russian budget, the human element is a tragedy for the Russian soul. What is happening inside the Ivanivka pocket right now is a total breakdown of the vertical of power. We have accessed translated audio intercepts from the trapped units, and they are chilling. Soldiers are radioing their headquarters, begging for air support, begging for an evacuation corridor, begging for ammo, and the response from HQ: silence, or worse lies. The Russian generals, terrified of reporting this disaster to Putin, are ordering these trapped men to hold their ground and attack, knowing full well that they are sending them to certain death. This betrayal has shattered the morale of the troops on the ground. We are seeing something rare: mass insubordination. Entire platoons are refusing orders. There are reports of Russian officers ripping off their rank insignias and changing into civilian clothes to try and blend in with the locals to escape. The elite status of these units of VDV paratroopers in the naval infantry makes this collapse even more significant. These were the men who were supposed to be the toughest, the most loyal, the best trained, yet they are surrendering. If they feel betrayed by Moscow, then the rod has spread to the very core of the army. This is the outmatched part of the story. It's not just about who has more guns, it's about who values their soldiers' lives. Ukrainian commanders spent weeks planning this to minimize their own casualties. Russian commanders walked their men into a trap because they were too arrogant to read a map. The contrast is visible to every soldier on the front line. The Russian soldier now realizes he is nothing more than meat to his superior's line item on a spreadsheet to be expended for a few meters of ground. Inside the cauldron, chaos reigns. Units are firing on each other in the confusion. Logistics officers are hoarding the remaining food for themselves. The structure of the army has dissolved into a Lord of the Flies scenario of survival. This psychological wound will not heal when the shooting stops. The survivors who enter Ukrainian captivity will tell their stories, and those stories will filter back to the barracks in Russia, spreading the poison of doubt. Why are we dying here? Why did they leave us behind? Finally, we must zoom out and ask, why does this specific patch of land matter? Why did Ukraine invest so much in this specific trap? This isn't just about killing Russians, it's about checking the map and taking back what is theirs. The Ivanivka sector is the key to the south. By clearing this kill zone, Ukrainian forces have effectively unlocked the gateway to the critical railway logistics hub that supplies the entire southern occupation zone. For 2 years, Russia has used this rail line to move millions of tons of shells and fuel to the front. By advancing 20 kilometers through this trap, Ukraine has brought that railway within standard artillery range. This is the game-over move for Russian logistics. If the trains can't run, the army can't fight. Furthermore, this victory is a massive political statement. These villages and fortifications were not just gray zones, they were annexed territories that Russia claimed were forever Russia. By liberating them, Ukraine has proven that the Russian constitution which claims this land is not worth the paper it is written on. They are systematically dismantling the myth of Russian permanence. The strategic momentum has now shifted violently. Russia has been forced to pull reserves from other critical fronts like Zaporizhia and Kupiansk to try and plug the hole in Ivanivka. This thinning of the line creates new weak points elsewhere which Ukraine can now exploit. It is a domino effect. One well-placed trap has destabilized the entire theater of operations for the coming winter. The business file conclusion is simple. Russia invested billions of dollars and tens of thousands of lives to hold this ground, and they lost it in 72 hours because they were outsmarted. They are now facing a strategic bankruptcy. They have lost the initiative, they have lost their reserves, and they are losing the narrative. The trap at Ivanivka wasn't just a battle, it was the turning point that proved the Russian colossus's fate of clay, and Ukraine has the hammer to shatter them. The land is returning to its rightful owners, 1 square kilometer at a time, and the price being paid by the invaders is one they can no longer afford.